Okay. All right, so I think we're good to go now. Sorry, let me just last checks. Mhm. Um, okay, so sorry for the delay. I think we can get started right about now. Hello and welcome to the Spark Ignite series. The Ignite series is a weekly capacity building virtual live session where industry leaders bridge the gap by discussing topics that provide entrepreneurs with practical solutions, access to insights, and resources to thrive in the ever-evolving world of business. Now, for those of you who are new to our community, the Spark is a social impact organization that serves as a vehicle, rather a bridge delivering value that allows small businesses to innovate and scale across Nigeria and Africa. And for the past 5 years, the Spark has been channeling carefully curated resources to local startups so they can meet their goals, right? So we're constantly bridging the gap between entrepreneurs, professionals, and enablers through growth resources in our community, such as Magazine, the Masterclass, Ask an Icon, which is our speed mentorship platform, our store with discounted products and services, access to grants, funding, and so much more. And so since over the past few years, we featured several industry leaders. And today, I'm so excited to welcome two icons to this live session. All right. And with me, I have Eloho, Omame, and Odun, Eweniyi. Now, Eloho is an entrepreneur and investor with a personal mission to advance equity, capital, and leadership for women in Africa through technology and entrepreneurship. All right, so she's co-founder of First Check Africa, and she was also the founding managing director of Endeavor Nigeria. And at First Check Africa, she's driving a conversation about women's representation, ambition, ownership, and power, and leading a charge to get more capital into the hands of Africa's female entrepreneurs. And then Odun is also the co-founder and COO at PiggyVest, which is an automated savings and micro investment platform that helps young Nigerians access financial services. She's also the co-founder at First Check Africa, which is, as I said, it's an angel fund and community for women in tech, whose mission is to advance equity, capital, and leadership for a generation of women in Africa, while also promoting equality for women. Now, for those who don't know, Eloho was on the cover of the March-April edition of our magazine, which was released last week. And we had the privilege of having Eloho and Odun share their growth stories, life lessons, and beliefs that have helped them thus far. All right, and you can get this edition by visiting www.thesparkng.com/magazine. Right. And so tonight we'll be watching a live conversation on the topic navigating startup funding. Right. So Eloho and Odun will be answering some of the key questions that you, our community, have submitted over the past few weeks to them to answer tonight. Right. So they'll be discussing the challenges with funding, how to raise your first round, funding options available, and so much more. So right now we are currently streaming live across Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So Eloho and Odun, thank you so much and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's a privilege having you both.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Larry. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So right about now, I think I'll just let you both get started.
You let us interview ourselves. No problem.
Yeah. All right then.
Thanks a lot. So, are you interviewing me or am I interviewing you? We're interviewing each other.
I don't know. I think we just like look at the questions and see like where do we want to start from.
Yeah. Off you go.
Right. Okay. I am trying to pull up the questions again.
Okay, let me help you. Right. So the first one says startup funding and its challenges. Funding is crucial for every business. However, sourcing enough money can be difficult. What are the challenges to expect when sourcing for funding, especially in Nigeria?
Well, I mean, I think that just because you have like the fundraising issues and then you have like the Nigerian issues. So it's kind of like whatever you're expecting there's going to be a challenge for fundraising, just double it, because the Nigerian factor is really very special. But more seriously is that a lot of I think startup founders will go out there fundraising without actually like doing the work of being investment ready. And I know this because this is a mistake that we made as well. And then, we went out there, tried to raise funds for this startup that we had just like started and no one cared, like honestly. People weren't interested in funding the startup. We didn't have like a solid revenue model yet. We just told people like there's something here. And obviously they said no, and also the banks will kill you. And so it was a very interesting journey. So the first thing is there's several like steps to investor readiness, but the best reference I have for that I suppose is the Village Capital Viral Pathway that tells you to assess yourself around, are you what's the market, the team, the product, the scale, the exit, the business model, and several other things where you get to tell yourself at what stage am I in this. And then when you finish assessing yourself on those things, it does tell you whether you're actually ready for any kind of funding, angel funding or venture funding. Now, the challenges that you'll expect obviously will be one, investors in Nigeria are very risk averse. So if you're building a new thing, you're going to have kind of a harder time convincing people to give you money. The second thing is that there is a lot of competition now also. So if you're not building a new thing, that means you're building something that's been done before. You're trying to improve upon something that's existing. So that means that also you have to work harder at proving yourself. Like, why should I give you money and not like this other person? So there's quite a bit of back and forth between founders and investors. And there's not a lot of material out there that's Nigeria specific on how young founders can get ready for investment, So it's kind of still a bit of a stumble in the dark. So you do as much as you can to prepare and then you go for the pitch. But obviously it's a very interesting journey. So don't let that stop you.
Mm-hmm. As you were speaking, I was looking at the question again and it said, obviously what are the challenges to expect? I guess rather than even just challenges, which I think you've enumerated quite a few quite well, one thing that for sure I think people should expect is lots of no's, right? Whether it's equity or whether it's debt. And I think sometimes I'm still a little bit surprised at how often entrepreneurs seem to be surprised when somebody says no to them.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where I suppose you're an entrepreneur and you have conviction around what you're trying to do. But sometimes where I kind of think, we could probably do a little bit better as the people who are raising capital is to take things a little bit less personally. The truth is 90% of people that you approach about raising capital, whether it's equity, whether it's debt, will say no, right? Because it's just human nature. Yeah. It's easier to say no than to take a risk on something, right? And if you're going to take that risk, the reasons have to be very, very compelling. So, rather than sort of, sometimes that thing of they said no, my encouragement would be, well, how do I turn that no into a yes? But even before that, I guess, how do I increase the likelihood? It's a relatively small margin, I guess, to increase because that instinct is there. I think very often people say no, but how do I even increase the chances that I get a yes? And the first thing is, how do I make sure that I'm talking to the right investors? Yep. How do I make sure that if I'm looking for capital to, am I talking to a venture capitalist? Does that make sense with the business model, or should I really rather be raising some kind of debt for this business? Things like that. Who should I be talking to? Which banks are tech friendly? Which banks are startup friendly? Things like that. Which investors invest really early? And I think that work also helps to reduce the shock and the frequency and the shock of the no's. But I think no is unfortunately it's part of the journey, and I would encourage people to expect that and sort of keep pushing and breaking through for until the yes comes. What else? I don't know. Can we think of any other challenges to expect when sourcing for funding?
I mean, there's also the fact that like you're asking people, if you're talking to Nigerian investors, right, they're familiar with the market, they know what's going on. If you're talking to foreign investors, you have to consider the fact that you are asking them to invest in Nigeria, right? So that's a whole other thing where you definitely have to do the work of convincing them that like their money is not just going to go up in flames and like random things like that. A lot of foreign investors, to be serious, are not very familiar with the Nigerian or the African market. So that's usually the first big hurdle if you're trying to raise money from outside the country, because you have to properly set the stage and explain to them why the market exists in Africa, because a lot of people still don't think we use the internet. And then after you set the stage for why the market exists, then you have to convince them that their money can 200x the same way it would if they gave it to a voice chat startup in the US or something.
Or a pet, at-home pet care booking service or something. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, what else do we have here? Why entrepreneurs fail to secure funding. Securing funding is a significant startup hurdle that isn't easy to overcome. What are the common mistakes entrepreneurs make when looking for investment? I mean, I think I touched on one already, which is rather than frame this as mistakes, I think I'd rather frame it as, things to do, if you see what I mean. Or perhaps things not to do. But I think for sure, one for me is this idea of just preparing. And preparing is a bunch of things. Preparing is preparing the pitch and preparing the business and preparing it from an investment readiness state. Another is preparing to talk about my business and anticipating the questions I'm going to get, anticipating, for example, what investors, you just mentioned foreign investors, what kinds of concerns or fears, or what kind of questions, concerns, fears that investor is likely to have based on what I know about them from the outside in, right? And it might be, and that might mean preparing for the Nigeria macro conversation. It might be, in the case of, for example, a piggyvest, my guess is it might be preparing for the Nigeria regulatory conversation. In the case of a business, in case of talking to an investor who is Nigerian and is in Nigeria or is African and is used to investing in Africa, etc., it's a slightly different conversation, right? Maybe it's something around, I don't have a problem believing that this is going to scale really quickly in Nigeria. Talk to me about how quickly you're going to go into Kenya and Ghana and all the other places, right? Which is interesting because it's polar opposite ideas. But I think having that preparation is super important. Yeah. And then another part of preparation is, I think I touched on it, is just who are you talking to? And does it make sense to be talking to them? I'll give one example, even at first check. I think when we first launched, we had a few people who would, and we talked about, supporting women and investing in women. We had people who would make applications, but these are businesses that are in the market. They've been in the market for 4 or 5 years. And we were talking about being early believers for people who are starting up their companies and they want to sort of start up tech-enabled companies. I suppose there's that mindset of shoot your shots, but at the end of the day, for us, our sort of investment focus was very clear. Our thesis was very clear. We went to lots of pains to put it out there. So with the best of intentions, there were just some things we were seeing that we couldn't invest in. And so the question became, how do we let these founders down gently? So that sounds like, when the reality is the problem was that there wasn't a fit to begin with.
It's interesting that you actually first check, because the next thing we're supposed to talk about was milestones to reach before raising venture capital. So it says here, many startups tend to raise funding before they are ready. What are the milestones that will demonstrate to future investors that the founder has traction and a road to profitability? And I think it's very interesting in the line of the fact that we've now listened to over 30 pitches, and we had like how many applications? Maybe like 150.
Yeah.
And what's like common like thread among some of them is that they have like an idea. Let's assume the idea is great, but they're not like, they don't have a full grasp of what like a person would see and say, oh, I'm going to give you money right now. Right? A lot of people believe that, oh, you know, give me money so I'll build this idea into an app ASAP. And you know, that's not really like the way things go.
So I will spend a lot of money building it, not even just building. So let me give me a lot of money so I can build that, and then we'll figure out whether or not this thing works.
If you're an early stage company, I think that it's very worth it. And you know, we actually just finished a no-code workshop, so this actually all ties in. If you're an early stage company, it's very interesting and very imperative on you to build like the simplest version of the solution that you're trying to launch. In the cheapest possible way and the most effective way. And I have experience with this because, you know, we actually always tell us that we got the idea on December 31st, and the first version of the app was like ready January 7th. And why is that? It's because we just turned to the city and told him to build something that automates like withdrawals. Like, we were lucky in that we had like a tech person on the team, but what he built was literally the jankiest, thinnest possible version of what Piggyverse now is. And it was testing that with like a very small set of people, right? You know, we got the idea from wooden boxes that people were using. And so we built the simplest version and took it back to that community of people who were building wooden boxes and told them, here, try this. And they did. So, and you know, like, so we had like maybe 20 people sign up, use it, give us feedback, right? You know, then we tweaked again and then continue to tweak. And we didn't even try to raise venture capital, but imagine that at that point, if we had looked at someone and said, oh, can you give us money to scale to 1,000 users? It'd have been worth it because people were already putting their money in the app on a very simple version. So, I mean, I think the least thing that you can do if you are trying to raise venture capital is probably have a very low tech, low expense MVP and a deck. And a deck that outlines what it is you're trying to do.
Sounds obvious.
So that like you don't have to like always be there to explain to the person you're trying to raise funds from, angel or not, that this is what you're trying to build.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely spot on. And honestly, just to sort of double click a bit on what you said, what I would love to see a lot more of, and I think the startups that we're excited about are the ones that have done this, is, you know, to your point, it's people who kind of, you know, get out of this mindset of I have to build an MVP and just stay in the mindset of I have to test a solution. And testing that solution, to your point around, you know, your wooden boxes analogy, might be everything from me saying, you know what, this is a really janky prototype, but sweep money out of your account into this central account that we'll all be seeing our money build up, and we'll earn interest on it. And at the end of the period, we'll share the interest back. And for example, it's an account that we all have access to, and we can see it on a dashboard. So what you're really testing is, will people do that? Or I take money out of their accounts, put it aside? Is that valuable to them? And is that something that they would, is that value that they want, right? So that's one other, you know, way to potentially prototype it. But to your point around even the no-code workshop that we ran earlier, I was fascinated by the fact that live, we built an app that was collecting payments and was selling furniture and all of these things, right? So definitely this idea of kind of staying in, how do I do this in a low-cost way? How do I run a bunch of experiments? How do I figure out the core of the core of the solution that I think people will value for this problem, and put it back to those people? So to your point around taking it back to the 20 people that were already using, or the people that were already using the wooden boxes, how do I take it back to them and say, try this is a better way to do it? And I think that journey from 20 users, call it an alpha test, to I don't know how many thousands of users, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users Piggyverse has today, is one that kind of has to happen incrementally and step by step, right? And it's, you know, people talk about how growth, you know, is very slow and then happens all at once. But I think sometimes, my impression anyway, since in the last 3 or 4 months, is there's this expectation that if I build an app for $100,000 or $50,000, the day I switch it on, there'll be 50,000 active users on it, which is always an interesting expectation. What else? So I think another important milestone related is generating some, showing that people will pay for your solution. I think it's super important. So actually having people interact with the prototype, with the early version, and having them ideally pay for it, I think is a great thing, because getting people to stick their hands in their pocket and pay is always valuable. And then the other thing, it says my internet is unstable. I hope it's okay. The other thing, the last thing I would say is for me, I always, sometimes I think people stop at, oh, we've had 2 people use the app, so now we need to build a whole load of things, right? I would love to see 2 become 20, become 200, and then we're talking about the fact that you need tens of thousands of dollars to scale the product.
Honestly, I just look back at conversations where we're telling people you can use Excel for this, and it's true, you can use Excel. And for instance, I think I lost Eloho's video. Okay, she's still here though.
Sorry, I did it. I tested to see if it made your sound better because I was losing you. But go on.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, you're breaking up a little bit, but let's keep going. I'll see if I need to switch my video off again. I'll do it for a few seconds.
No, what I was saying was that in the early days, you really can use the most basic tools, because in the first year of operation for Piggyverse, everything we tracked on Google Sheets. And when we went for our first accelerator program, they're like, where's this number? I just turned my computer. Oof, look at it. It's on Excel. And they're like, oh, you're going to have to automate. And we're like, we have automate when we have money. We don't have money right now. And now I think maybe it's a little easier for people to raise money. And that's why there's the urge to just oh, let's build this thing right now and have 10 people use it.
Yeah.
So the next one.
And I think related to that, before you move on, I think related to that in terms of, the money that we have, I think, and kind of the journey to a full version of the product. I think another thing that, another important, I wouldn't call it a milestone necessarily, but another important thing to have, especially when you're talking at the very early stages, which is where we focus as First Check, is, I would say, a product roadmap, but ideally in fact, significantly more importantly to me, is a set of milestones around which you want to sort of take the business to seed stage, right? So how many users do I need to hit? And how quickly do I want to grow in order to do that? When I hit X number of users at a certain cost and a certain revenue assumption, what does that mean in terms of where my startup is? And how am I going to sort of move from one big milestone to the other? How am I going to go from 0 to 100 customers, from 100 to 500, from 500 to 1,000, from 1,000 to 5,000? And what are the channels and the triggers around that? The truth is, that plan will almost certainly not materialize in the way that you lay it out. Yeah, but I think having that systematic approach, knowing, it's yeah. And I think I would love to see a lot of those kinds of structured approaches when people try and raise early stage capital.
Right.
Okay.
It says here, tips for raising your first round of funding. What are the best practices to follow in securing funding, and how to tilt the odds in one's favor? Well, I mean, you see, guys, I'm a newbie investor, so I don't have a lot of tips. Eloho can give you more tips than I can, but I'll say this, that a lot of investing is art. There's no science to it, right? There's obviously things that you can do better that increase your chances, but for the most part, just properly prepare your deck, your MVP, like we just mentioned before, your thought process around the growth of the product. How are you going to get the users, right? And everyone comes and says, social media, but how are you going to use that social media in a way that a person who's listening to you is convinced that it will yield something for you, right? When you say oh, we're going to be at 10,000 users and you're only at 10 when you're talking to me, you need to be able to chart a creative, reasonable, and actually believable path to 10,000 so that I can drop money, right? A lot of us also don't take things personally. I think we mentioned this before. You're going to hear a lot of no's. You're going to hear really terrible things about your product, and that's your baby. But you have to always learn to sift through the noise, pick up the things that are useful for you and use it to improve the product, right? One small anecdote, I hope the person is not watching this live. One time when we built Piggyverse in 2017, so One person who's still in our tech ecosystem went on Twitter and said that like this product, that he's betting against it. I was so hurt. But I didn't reply that day, and I'm very happy I didn't reply, because now I get to make this kind of jokes. And we're still here. And that way we actually did like, what's wrong with the product? Why are you betting against it? And perhaps it helped us to kind of tighten our like screws a little and improve it. But people are going to say weird things like that. And you're just going to have to take it in stride, because there's a focus, right? Improve the product, improve how you pitch as a founder, because you can have a great product, right? And if you don't pass your message across very well, you're not going to raise money. You can be socially awkward, but still be able to pitch your product in a way that the message is clear and heard. And the other thing, I suppose, is finally like understand that sometimes an investor is just not investing because like they're not investing. They might not have a good reason, and it's not great, but it is what it is.
Yeah, spot on. I think the only thing I would add to that is, you mentioned team, deck, the way that you pitch, and ultimately, you said, it's an art. I think you're right. I think successfully raising capital, I guess looking at it from the entrepreneur side, is a little bit of a dance, right? Assuming everything is in place, you have a great product, you have a great company, you're growing really well, etc. I think that sort of idea, what a tip that I would give is sort of view it as a little bit of a dance, right? Where you're trying to get the investor excited about your company and your product, and create a sense of urgency and a sense of FOMO around, if I don't invest in these guys now, by the time they come back the next time, they'll be too expensive. Or if I don't invest in these guys and girls now, somebody else will do it and there'll be no more room for me in the transaction. Even for debt, right? If I don't invest in this company now, somebody else, if I don't give them some debt, somebody else will, and I'll be left with all the terrible companies that will never pay back my loan. Like there's always kind of a dance around getting an investor to be excited, of course, with credibility, to be excited about the business and excited about the idea of going on a journey with you. And all of the things that you've mentioned ultimately go into that idea of building credibility with an investor. So I think, so does the product roadmap make sense, for example? Does the go-to-market make sense? Who are the founders and how credible are they? What is their experience with the problem they're solving? How excited are they about this problem that they're solving? How big could this market get? And I think we talk about all of these things a lot, and we almost sort of treat it as a box-ticking exercise around how to talk about, how to pitch, how to what have you. But if you really sort of take a step back and think about the why of why, from an entrepreneur's perspective, why these things matter, it is your first expo into, I think, a successful fundraising, right? Which is that you want to sort of make that investor feel as if they don't do this thing, they're going to be missing out very seriously. What I would say is a lot of people conflate that notion with, let me talk really, really quickly. Maybe if I talk really, really quickly, this person will think, I actually think it's the opposite. I think you sound measured, you sound thoughtful, you sound credible, you sound, I want to say almost a little bit arrogant, frankly, in the discussion around around the vision. The vision is big, and you sound like you know exactly where you're going, where I actually think some of those, in terms of tips, I think some of that psychology actually can work very, very well if executed well by a founder. And then the last thing I think I would say is something around the team. I don't think people, I would like to see people be a little bit more deliberate about who they team up with as well. And I think it's an important tip for raising capital. So at some point in a pitch and in that dance, so, for example, you said investors, sometimes the answer is just no. And the investor just has a gut instinct that I don't want to do this thing. And I can't articulate it too far beyond this. Maybe there's 70%, 80% of my articulation around why. And there's the 20%, which is just, finger in the air, gut feeling, is this the right investment for me to be making? And sometimes getting them from that 80% to 100% comes down to the individual and the team, because the judgment that they're making is, do I trust these people with my money? Not so much do I trust them not to run away with my money. That's actually, a very rudimentary way to think about it. But do I trust them that I'm going to give them $10 and $10 is going to come back to me as $2,000 in 5 years' time, for example? Do I believe that, this girl or this guy and girl are going to do everything that they can to grow this thing into something really, really big that's going to make me the kinds of returns that I want to make as an investor. And I think there's always that piece as well, which comes down to the team. So, sometimes people say, oh, I don't know, I want to build an app. Who do I know that is who do I know that is a technical person that can build it for me? Oh yeah, come, let's build this app together. We're not co-founders. I think people need to sometimes be a little bit more thoughtful. Because it's almost like your calling card, right? Are you two the best people for this, to be running this company, to be building this company? And is this a team that I think when I give them my $2, $10, it comes back to me as 2,000? And a lot of that, I think a lot of that is really in the presentation and things like that. So it's important just to a tip would be pick a great team, great co-founder, let everybody's credentials kind of speak for themselves. And also think about this formal dance and ways to build confidence in your ability and build urgency around that need to invest in one's company. There's one company at the moment that I really, really want to invest in. I'm feeling a sense of urgency around. So yes, it definitely works. What else?
Okay. What tips? Approaching the right investor and that success.
Yeah. What are the measured processes in identifying and approaching the right investor and improving one's chances at success? Gosh, I feel like we've answered this question. What are the measured processes in identifying and approaching the right investor and improving one's chances at success? I think the first thing is, what kind of capital does a business need? Is it equity? Is it debt? When people invest equity, it's because they believe that something is going to make them, some kind of asymmetric return, right? So I'm going to give you $10, you're going to give me 200 back. I'm going to give you $10, you're going to give me 5,000 back. Either you're going to give it to me back at a point in time, or you're going to give it to me in dividends over time. But I'm going to make, for the risk of a company and the risk of being an equity holder of a company, which means you're a junior, for example, to a debt holder. For that risk, I want to know that I'm going to be compensated in a way that reflects some level of asymmetry in my return, right? So I think that's a different thing from saying, and I think when you kind of understand the kinds of the kinds of returns that different kinds of investors look for, I think that's a first kind of guidepost towards first of all, should I even be raising equity for this business or not? So you're running a business. Not all businesses are appropriate for equity funding because they're not going to deliver the kinds of returns that investors want. And then even within that equity bucket, not every business is appropriate for venture capital funding. For some of them, you're probably better off with angels and things like that, who, you'll probably never raise from an A16Z or something, right? Because the business can't scale to that point, and that's okay. But you can talk to business angels, and some of them can give you quite significant amounts of money, and in return, they'll take dividends over time and things like that. So I think this kind of bucket of investors, first of all, can and should be segmented based on what the profile of the business and the potential returns that an investor can make are. So that's one first step. And then, of course, there are different kinds of debt providers. There's the banks, and there's a few alternative funding institutions as well that will provide debt. What else? Measured processes in identifying. Yeah, I think we want to think about even, and then within that, right, if you've then decided that you want to, if you decide that equity is what's appropriate for you and you're willing to, the advantage of debt is you don't give up any of the ownership of your company. The flip side of equity is that as much as you're not, you don't have an obligation to repay certain amounts every month or over a period or what have you, it's longer, it could be longer term capital. You give up some ownership of your business in exchange for that, right? But even within the bucket of equity, I think the other process that needs to happen in identifying the right investor is, what stage is my company at? So there are different kinds of investors. There are angel investors, there are pre-seed investors, there are seed investors, there are Series A investors, there are growth equity investors, there are private equity investors. And then, of course, there are retail investors who will buy equity on the stock exchange. And I think sometimes, again, there can be that conflation of, are you an investor? Okay, great, come and look at my debt. and it doesn't really work like that. The risk profiles are different. In fact, starting from that angel all the way to what I described as listed equity, the risk changes, right? For an investor, it becomes less and less and less. And I think it's important to sort of think about that as well.
So I think the only thing I'd like to add to that is that people do like a lot of research, right? Mm-hmm. Like you've done all those things on your product, you've identified what stage you're at, and then you're pitching to investors who don't invest in your sector, or who don't invest at your stage, or who don't invest into your country, and things.
And then you're taking it personally.
Because like there's a lot of investors out there. There's a lot of money moving around, but there's also different kinds of. There's investors who invest only in impact-based companies. And so if your company doesn't have like societal impact or anything like that, they're just not going to consider it. Social impact, sorry. They're just not going to consider it. There's companies who will invest in non-profits. There's companies who will not touch, investors who will not touch non-profits, right? There's investors who only invest in healthcare. There's investors who only invest in fintech. So a founder who's trying to pitch to the right investor has to put in a lot of research. What kind of investor are you looking for? And after you've identified them, do they actually, I can remember one time pitching to an investor, I'm finishing the pitch, and then it's like, yeah, great pitch, but we don't invest in Africa. So that kind of thing is like, what a waste of 30 minutes. How do I get my time back? And all those very worried thoughts. So he's
Why did he let you finish the pitch?
He did, very patient listener, attentive, asked questions. And it's like, oh yeah, this is not part of my like thesis. And so things like that, you don't want that happening, except you're like in a room where you cannot pick and choose. But when you can, you want to like target your efforts towards the place where they are most likely to reap rewards, so that you're not just like pitching into the void and you become a fixture at all of those competitions. They're pitching the wrong people all the time. And then research on the investors, and then research on the market that you're trying to like work in as well. One of the like most irritating things for me, I suppose, when listening to pitches is when a person has clearly not done the research about the market. It's like a founder who's Nigerian coming out to tell us now that his market size is 200 million, right? That's a badly researched number, and it's also not true. And so like there's a lot of work that has to go into the underlying, presentation before you go out there and try to speak to people. Improve upon all of those, and you have to know your numbers. Right? If you meet the right investor, you don't want them to ask you a question and you're then like, I don't have it with me right now. Especially when that's the one chance that you get to that investor. Usually nice, very good, especially if you're early stage, to be nice and tight on the numbers and nice and tight on who you're speaking to, so that because you're going to speak to like, to raise early stage funding, maybe 50 investors. And you want to make sure it's 50 investors who invest in your stage, your sector, and your geography, so that you know that your efforts were going where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to come back to something you said though, when you talked about talking to lots of investors and the guy saying, letting you finish, and then saying, yeah, but that sounds lovely, but I don't invest in Africa. Well done on your pitch, but I don't invest in Africa. I hear you. One thing I would say though is, and this is certainly not advice for people who are very early stage, but one thing I would say is, at some point, unfortunately, the reality is that our ecosystem is it's actually quite small. I was even looking at the data the other day. I think the size of the US market or something, I think, how everyone is saying that, globally and in Nigeria, wherever, women-led companies, women CEO companies earn 2% of, so in the US it's 2%, in Nigeria it's 2%. But I did the math. The US is 2%. It's bigger than the entire money coming into the African ecosystem.
That's actually true.
Right?
We don't
Africa. So our ecosystem is tiny. And the point I'm making is that at some point, if you scale beyond a certain point, you will first of all go from local investors to regional investors to global investors. But the reality is you will make that journey relatively quickly if your company is scaling very quickly. So look, for example, at the round that Flutterwave just did, and look at the investors on their cap table, right? compare it to a company that's raising at seed. We saw Lamy Seed yesterday or the day before. And of course, we recognized a few of those as local regional investors. But by the time they get to a Florida wave size, those funds won't have the capacity to do their deals. The point I'm making is that there's probably, probably post-seed, there is let me spend 10% of my time talking to the investors who will need to be in my, not even post-seed, probably just around the seed round, probably 10% of your time talking to investors who will not invest in your seed round now. But when you are a grown-up Series A company, they will start to look a little bit more closely. And there's probably 10% of your time that you'll spend kind of talking to them. So you'll know, but I think your point stands, right? Don't go into that conversation. Go into that conversation knowing that it is a conversation for the future. I know you don't invest in Africa yet. For example, I'm going to convince you that my company is going to be the first one that you should invest in. So we've just done our seed round, or we've just done our Series A. We're not actually fundraising at the moment, but give me 30 minutes and let me talk to you about why we're building a great company. So I think that's interesting. The other thing is, in terms of, it says approaching an investor best and right way. I want to talk about a wrong way. So one thing that really bugs me is when people spam emails. So you'll just see, sometimes I get lots of dear sirs. So I'll just get an email, dear sir. And it's obvious that it was a generic email that went out to, 50 investors. You didn't bother. Mail merges are simple enough. You can even set up as a mail merge, but I'll feel as if I'm the only person in your life. You can do it so that it's so personalized. And so you didn't even bother doing that. That upsets. So I think, in general, I'm a big fan of cold approaches. Like, if you've got a great company, just reach out to an investor, right? Most people are fine with it. But the spamming thing is never a good way to go. It almost doesn't really matter what is in the rest of your email. It tends to turn people off very quickly.
Well, what else do we have here? Okay. Funding options. What are some of the best funding options and how to determine the best sources for one's business? I actually think Eloho answered this extensively. You want to go over it again?
No, not especially. So I know. What are some of the best funding options? The truth is, unfortunately, there's a relatively small pool of funding options. The good news is that, and I think just to recap super quickly, what I said was that it's important to think about the financial profile of the business that you're building and have that guide whether or not, first of all, the first decision is, do I need equity or am I a fit for equity or am I a fit for debt?
Yeah.
And then if I'm a fit for equity, what stage am I at? And what does that mean in terms of my fit for different investors at different stages? If I'm super early, I probably want, when I say super early, I don't have a product yet. I'm everywhere between product, idea, and product. I probably want an angel or a pre-seed fund of some kind. First Check Africa is the pre-seed fund. At the seed stage, I think Microtraction says they want a product, they want an MVP. So you kind of need to have an MVP there. They're probably early seed stage. But with seed stage, typically you have a product out there, you have users, you have users using it, and you have growth that's coming from that, and etc. Right. So, there's a bit of work around, I think you spoke very well about the research. There's a bit of work around doing the research around who to go for. I think what I was going to say, which I think is interesting, in the ecosystem. So we've spoken already about, the relative size and kind of, these numbers are ultimately quite small in the global scheme of things. And we hope that we can do things to make it bigger. So as much as we're increasing the pie for women, I think there's a case to increase the entire pie overall for everybody. But what I would say there is, I really like this trend of this democratization trend, right? Where you're seeing syndicates come together to invest in early stage businesses, where you're seeing investor collectives or investment collectives, and people really putting their money together so that they can write, good, relatively small but meaningful checks without needing to invest $10,000. Because the truth is, a lot of that early stage capital, I think what will really catalyze the ecosystem is early stage capital from local capital, right? And potentially even diaspora and capital as well, but it has to be able to be deployed in ways that are efficient for the investors, as opposed to in these old school, which are increasingly being, I would say, disrupted. These old school funds whereby you need to have $100,000 and you need to have $2 million of net worth before you're eligible to invest in an offshore venture capital fund. I think what's happening today is you're seeing collective, pools of capital collecting locally, which is fantastic. So those are also available, and a few of those are maybe I should mention them, but Fintech Africa is one of them.
Oh, that's hilarious. But yeah, that mostly covers it, I think. See, now I don't know if I've lost you or you've lost me. Okay, so I lost him.
Hi, I'm back. My internet was patchy. Okay. All right. Off we go.
Almost at the end. So now it's just like personal advice to entrepreneurs in Africa. I don't know. I'll just ask, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want to do? Sure. You don't want to go and work in an oil company and earn a lot of money.
Oh, for sure.
Entrepreneurs, we suffer, but like, anyway, I mean, if you get your company worth like $1 billion dollars like Flutterwave, then I suppose you don't suffer.
Well, you suffer for some time and then you stop suffering after.
Yeah. But I don't know how to advise entrepreneurs because I don't think that's, every day we're still all learning and kind of adjusting to what the reality really is. But I'll tell you something that my dad used to tell me. He used to tell me that, and this is something that has ended up being true, seeing as most of you listening are probably Nigerian. And if you're African, this applies. You know how they say Africa is not a country. I know we say it isn't, but isn't it? Is that we should all kind of be prepared in that, like, whatever can go wrong will absolutely go wrong, right? And you kind of have to have a roll with the punches kind of attitude where things happen and I don't think you have any time to dwell on it as a person who's running a business because you immediately have to find solutions. That's the first thing. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And then the second thing for me, and those are the only two things I know, is that you should not be afraid to kill a product. Kill a product. Kill 5.
Do you want to talk about the 5 that you killed?
Yes. When we were in, maybe this is why they bet against us. So when we were still running Push CV, we started Push CV. And then when we started Push CV, ran Push CV for about 6 months, we looked at the food sector for some reason and thought, hey, we can do something here as well, right? And so we started to think around, we're giving jobs to young people. How about we take it a step further by allowing young people who cook as a hobby, cook in bulk and sell to like other young people who don't want to cook. And so we created this startup called 500 Dishes. And it was like a really huge, very interesting thing because, all those weird list startups to look out for, 10 fastest growing startups, it was on it. And, we had like one like really huge food festival that had like 1,000 people in attendance, very successful. And then we had a second slightly smaller one, but just as successful. Yeah. But like 9 months into it, it started to experience like challenges, like logistics problems. That person that was pitching and telling you delivery guys ate the food. I'm not even joking. No. Like in front of
I still don't believe that story, but she insisted that it was true.
I ran the business. The delivery guy picked up food from the chef and ate it midway to delivering it to the owner. Yes. And when he came back to the office, he sat down in the office and just like didn't say anything. And then the like recipient called us and he's like, my food is half eaten. And we're like, what? And then we asked him, like, why did you eat the food? I was like, I was hungry. And, I couldn't even fight him. Like, I get it. I get the hunger. And so that was one of the big problems that we were facing. And, people would get their food late because there was traffic. Food wasn't getting the food will be cold before it gets to where they want, and it's breakfast and it's getting there at 1 p.m. and things like that. And then it started to lose a lot of money, way more money that had been invested into it. So we decided to shut it down. And we did the same with this company called 99 Staff, which we had. And it was an outsourcing company, like Fiverr. I think people are making a go of it now. But then, when we launched it, peer-to-peer outsourcing tasks, like a TaskRabbit or something. And then, it's people were like creating tasks on it. In fact, we got like really huge contracts from one of these banks. And we did the task for one of their products, and a lot of money over a 6-month period. But after the bank contract ended, we realized that the peer-to-peer contracts that weren't as big as we thought they would be. The bank contract let us see that the peer-to-peer wasn't as much. So when it ended, it was so no one is really connecting people to jobs. We had to generate the jobs, and so obviously, so we shut it down. And then we had household cleaning. I'm not going to go into details. And then we had front desk, which is like a Shopify. Like for Nigeria, we shut it down. And one that went unnamed, we didn't even get to launch it before we shut it down. So
why did you shut it down? Why what was the reason for shutting this last one down?
I think we just kind of lost interest halfway. It's just we were ginger at the beginning, and then we lost interest halfway. And then, in 2016, and then, everything was going well. Push TV was bankrolling all these experiments. Terrible startup founders, I know. And then, and we made one big mistake with Push TV after we raised some funding. We raised the seed from Lead Pass, and then we raised a bridge round of about 250K. And at that time, we're running this growth hack, the Elite Employee Quest, that took us from 30K users to 600,000 in 2 weeks. So we're really
on Push TV.
Yes, we're really good with the experiments. And so, but what that meant was that we needed more people to help us do CV reviews manually. And so we had an office full of interns. And, because the user growth spiked, revenues also spiked. And we had this money we'd raised. So when it was time to let all the interns go, we didn't. We converted all of them into full staff. So by the end of 2015, I'm not even joking, the company had 2 million naira left. And that was our lowest point, and so we were dealing with having to let people go because the company had no money left. We had to downsize from a team of about 25 to a team of about 4 people extra other than founders. And then we're just thinking, let's go home in December and figure out how we would work on this in January. And it was that December 31st that we got the idea for Piggyvest. So it's kind of,
that's a really cool story.
So people should not make all those horrid mistakes like hiring too fast. That's why in Piggyvest, before we hire, you have experience with us not hiring. It's be is it time to hire that person? But are you sure? Are you really sure we cannot go 3 more months before hiring?
How big is the team now at Piggyvest?
The team is 55 people.
Not bad. That's a big family.
At that point, when we were building Piggyvest, we told ourselves that this team was not going to be more than 50 to scale the entire thing. We say a lot of things when we're building. Founders are very dreamy people. I think a lot of the personal advice is mostly you have to ground yourself in some kind of reality. And I'm the most realistic person on my team.
You are pretty realistic, to be fair. I find you very realistic.
But even then, there's this head in the cloud thing that's still there, regardless. Yes, I can get it to 1 million users. Of course, we can get it to 7,000.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Cool. My very last thing in terms of personal advice would be, I don't know if it's advice to, let me just say advice. I think it's important that people make mistakes. And I think there's a lot of concern and fear around making mistakes and the judgment and what will they say and this, that, and the other. And the reality is people's memories aren't that long. Your memory is longer than anybody else's memory. So you make a mistake, you're afraid of being judged, they moved on to the next person. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe that's a break in it. Maybe, in 3 months' time, no one really remembers the mistake that you made, but you remember it, and you probably remember it for 3 years because you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I should have just moved on and done the next thing. So I always say, memories the judgment that we fear never lasts as long as the regret, that feeling of regret on the chances that we didn't take. Cool. Hi, Lanre.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation, really.
At one point, I think I'll go wrong video, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and that's the idea. And I'm so glad that we got two of you on this particular conversation, because funding is a problem for many entrepreneurs, and I think you've been able to trash it up, right? Particularly, I like what you said, Eloho, about asking yourself, who are you talking to, and does it make sense to be talking to them? Or are you talking to the right investor? And for the point where your business is at, is that the kind of person you should be talking to? And then, Odun, your story about the food business is crazy. But so sorry about that, by the way. But yeah, understanding when to kill a product, very important. And then you also mentioned that when you're talking to foreign investors, you have to do the work of convincing them that their money is not going to go up in flames, because they're not just investing in you, they're investing in the entire environment and all. So, yeah, fantastic. Too many nuggets. And I think, Eloho, you need to teach us that FOMO dance, because I think we will need to learn that.
Like, look, we're in a dance. We're going to waltz for a week, 3 months, and when we're done, you're going to give me all your money.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's how it goes when you're raising capital, and it's not mechanical. I'm being flippant, but you're building a relationship, you're building credibility, and all of those things are done deliberately, and they're done they're clever ways to potentially do things like that.
Yeah. All right, awesome. So I think our time is really fast spent. Thank you so much for taking time to be here. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today. For those of you who are part of the community, we'll be sharing the recording of this session, right? So if you'd like to watch the recording at your convenience, you can access it for free by just going to the sparkng.com/startup funding, right? That's the sparkng.com/startup funding. And I will also throw in a coupon code that gives you access to three months of free access to everything that the Spark has to offer, right? So if you can just, once you sign up, you'll see the coupon code, and then you can just take advantage of everything. All right, so thank you again. The Ignite series holds every Friday, right? And our next guests, we have Victoria Uwadoka. She's the corporate communications and public affairs manager at Nestle, as well as we have Blessing Abeng, who's director of communications at Ingressive for Good. So both of them will be having a conversation next week, Friday, same time, 7 p.m. on defining your brand voice. All right, so Eloho, Odun, thank you so much again for this. I'm so grateful. It was an interesting conversation. I do have a splendid night ahead. And everyone, take care.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.